hard that some Rishonim would hold that once there was a visual, then you'll never be chayav from it. At any Rishonim have visual in Hilchos Shabbos meetings, and that's just the Rashi. Also, trying to know. Right? No, I'm just saying. Let's say if we go going to those Rishonim who hold that any Rishonim, you have it in many different alcohols, and therefore visual might be an exception because there is a visual out. But the general rule of the law is that once you can't do another law, so I don't know exactly what Rebbe is holding. I have a similar suffix in Rabbi Yossi. What would be according to Rabbi Yossi if Reuven did the Mesikas Mayim and Shimon did the Gib? What would Rabbi Yossi say about it? Is it enough that Shimon did the Gib? Because according to Rabbi Yossi, Gibel is Mlechas. Or no, according to Rabbi Yossi, you got to start from the beginning. You need the Mesikas Mayim plus Gibel. But Gibel per se, without the Mesikas Mayim, is nothing. What the other side is saying that the Mesikas Mayim is nothing in and of itself, according to Rabbi Yossi. Bible, from the beginning, to be so, is the Gibel.
Just to clarify, are we this suggestion from Rabbi Yossi? We're suggesting that you live in the Mesikas Mayim before Shabbos?
Oh, excellent. According to that side, that Rebbe puts all the melacha into the Gibel. If, let's say, I did the Mesikas Mayim on Erev Shabbos, and then I did the Gibel on Shabbos, right? Or no? Is Rabbi Yossi saying, I need the Mesikas Mayim? That itself is not enough. And now, what we're saying is that you have melacha that's integrated with two different pa'ulos, and you have to do both pa'ula aleph and pa'ula beis.
One gave away the well, and there is a
all you need is only the Gibel. And yet, the Leital, despite that view, comes to that Gibel enough for Rabbi Yossi is not sufficient. He plays with the possibility that Lisha, according to Rabbi Yossi, is like Otso. You need Akira and you need Hanoch. If you did Hanoch without the Akira, or the Akira without Hanoch, you're not Chayim. And that since Otso is a case of two Pa'ulah, and if I integrate them, I'm Chayim from the world. So too, according to Rabbi Yossi, I need two Pa'ulah, both the Mesikas Mayim and Gibel. Otherwise, I'm not going to be Chayim. In any event, I'm just, just mentioning this because if you want to Lisha, it's very, all these figures in Rabbi Yossi and Rebbe. What I'd like to study with you now is the Rambam. The Rambam in Perek Ches, in Hilchos Shabbos, Halacha Tezayin, writes, Haloshki Rogeres Chayim. The Rambam establishes that the shear, the minimum amount of Lisha, is Kigrogeres, which means that when I put together the Kemach and the Mayim, and according to the Rambam Pasuk like Yossi, I need Gibel, the end product of that Gibel has to have a minimum size of a Grogeres. On the side, and this is not my main topic for today, but I'm a little bit perplexed because you're giving me a shear in the object itself, but what's the shear in the Pa'ula, the Melacha? How much Gibel do I have to do? At what point do we say I've done enough Gibel that I've achieved the goal of like a slash? I don't know, the Rambam doesn't talk about it. That's the question. But in anything, the solid stuff that I end up with as a result of the end product of Lisha, I certainly need a volume of a group there. Then that's not necessarily so. Then you might be higher in the Meleches Lash or less than a shear of Grogeres. Amagabeles Ha'ofor, Areza told us Lash. The Kamashiburo, Kidei Lasos Pikur Shel Tzofei Zor. Now again, if we had time, I would have a long discussion about what the Pikur of Tzofei Zor is. But basically, to make life a little bit short for us, a bridge, if you have this kind of a clear vessel in which you remove by heat the impurities of gold, what you need is an opening, and you put the bellows inside the opening, and you press in hot air, and the hot air causes the process of refinement. And Rambam says that all you need in order to create people, when you add an offer in mind, is you need the shear of Kedei Pikur. And Kedei Pikur is smaller than a Grogeres. And now we have a Maggid Mishnah with a Kesef, which is trying to find a source for the Rambam. Where did the Rambam derive this conclusion from? And the Lechem Mishnah, the Mishnah Melech, is of the opinion that he got it from a sugya on Daf Pei, which addresses the issue of Hotzah. And the question is, how much of a volume do I need to carry in order to generate a chiyuv of Meleches Hotzah? And the Gemara says that all I need is tid, let's say the clay or the concrete that has the sod, to form a covering over that hole of a pikur. So that means that in Meleches Hotzah, you're only chayav from Melacha Chashuva, and you have to carry something and transport something that's chashuv. Well, if I transport it in, and it has the chashivus of lechasas pikur, the Gemara says that that's considered a chiyuv hotzah. Says the Maggid Mishnah, the Rambam jumped to the following analogy, and he said, if in Meleches Hotzah there's a chashivus of a size of tin that's enough to cover a pikur, even though it's smaller than a grogeres, then who did in the case of Meleches Lash, if what I have is enough to cover a pikur, then that's considered chashivus, and therefore I should be chayav from Meleches Lash, even though lechasos pikur is less than a shear of grogeres. So basically, according to the Maggid Mishnah, the structure of the Rambam is that the Rambam pasach be'al. The same told the Av requires no less than what a grogeres. So the Malach of Lash requires a shear of a grogeres. However, when we get to the Tolda, so that the Av, you do a karka, the Tolda is not dealing with a karka, you're not dealing with any sort of substance that you eat, and therefore the shear for a Tolda changes. And where did the Rambam get this from? Because the Gemara says that you're chayav from Meleches Hotzah on a tid that is pikur, that's chashuv. Because for the refiners of gold, that's what they need. And therefore the same thing would apply to lash. Says the Kesef Mishnah, the name of the Ramach. It's very nice that the Lechem Mishnah sugya on Daf Pei, but we should look at the sugya on Daf Ayin Ches. And if we look at the sugya on Daf Ayin Ches, we have not done justice to the Rambam and found his source. What does the Gemara say on Daf Ayin Ches? So we're talking about Meleches Hotzah, and we're talking about transporting liquids. In the case of Mashki, the shear for Hotzah is Kedei Revius of Mashki. So the Gemara asks the following question. We have something called Mei Shofet, which is wastewater. And the Gemara wants to know, are you chayav for transporting wastewater? And the Gemara initially thinks there's no reason you should be chayav for wastewater, because wastewater has no chashivus. It goes right into the, as we would call it, the pot. So then why are you chayav for transporting Mei Shofet? So the Gemara says, no, I'll tell you why you're chayav for Mei Shofet. Because if you mix Mei Shofet with tint, you can create an opening that would serve on a pikur. Why would they use Mei Shofet? Mei Shofet is worthless. It has no value. It's going in the rubbish. But on the other hand, what are you use to create this clay of lechasos pikur? You're going to take regular water. Well, regular water is worth something. Maybe not to us, but back in the day. So why waste your money by using good water, healthy water? Use Mei Shofet. So the Gemara says, therefore, you should be chayav for Hotzah Mei Shofet. So the Gemara then asks the question, well, what do you mean you're chayav for Mei Shofet? And what shear are you chayav for Mei Shofet? How much Mei Shofet are you carrying? Are you transporting? So the Gemara says, enough to create pieces for a big core. So the Gemara says, if that be the case, why do you need to reveal this? We have a rule, and the Gemara establishes that all the Tanoim accept this rule, and that is that you chayav for hotzas mashkin if it's a kiravias. But according to you, that there's a kashivas in what? In mei shofrit, because it can serve as a substitute for mayim. When you mix it together with tit, and you create a kisui for the core, then you should be chayav even less than a goyis. So the Gemara says it all depends, and that is, what exactly are you carrying? Are you carrying mei shofrit in order to mix it with clay to create a peak? Or are you carrying a pikur's worth of tit? If you have a pikur's worth of tit, it's a very small amount. It's normally not the shear from melacha, but here it has kashivas. Why does it have kashivas? Because even though it's a small amount of tit, I can use it. It functions to cover pikur. But on the other hand, if you carry mei shofrim, you're not going to carry mei shofrim in order to mix it with tit and create a pikur. That's not worth your effort. Ain't on the Torah, it's not worth your time. In other words, to create this kind of a mixture between clay and water is a terrible. We call it in Yiddish a pashka. So it's not worth a pashka. If you're going to mix it together and do a gibel, and you're going to end up with a volume that you can use in multi-tasks, multi-different functions, then that's called Kedei Revius. Then you end up with a mixture that has the size of a revius. You'll use a small amount of it to cover your pikur, and the rest of it you'll use for other functions. Clay is multifunctional. But on the other hand, if you're creating just the pikur and you're carrying mei shofrim, it's just not worth the terrible. And that's the Maskana. Says the Ramah, I don't understand the Rambam. The Rambam says that for the Torah of the Gabalas of your chayav, or the shear of Kedei Lasos Pikur, Lasos, like the word Lasos, he's creating a Pikur. We're not talking about a case where he already has a mixture, a gibel, and now he wants to use it. That's true for Meleches Hotzah. In Meleches Hotzah, you can talk about the chashivas of an object that has a purpose, and you're transporting it in order to achieve that purpose. So you have now enough tit after gibel, then you can now transport it in order to use it for the tzarfei zah. But in a case where you're creating this mixture, you're doing a gibel of offer in order to what? You're doing it for the sake of creating a pikur. That's not worth your effort. The Gemara says, "Ain't no Torah." So how can the Rambam possibly derive his conclusion that you're chayav for meleches lishma in the Gabalas of which is told the plot? Simply, if you mix together enough of offer and mayim to create a gibel that's functional for lekasas pikur, the Gemara says nobody would do such a thing. It's not worth your effort. So it doesn't have Hashim. That being the case, how could the Rambam say that you're chayav for much? You're doing something from beginning to end. You lost about something. What do? You don't have a mixture yet. You're creating that mixture. Well, in the Hotzah, if you were involved in creating the mixture, you would not be chayav for a Hotzah of my shofir just to create a pikur. It's not worth your effort. It doesn't have Hashim. So the Ramach is arguing against the Rambam that the Maggid Mishnah was bringing this as a source to the Rambam. One for characters, we say Ma'amoshe. The source that the Maggid Mishnah is bringing is a kasha on the Rambam because it proves the exact opposite conclusion. It's not worth it for you to do this entire pashka of gibel just simply with chassis people. Maybe there is some just a person, but that's not certainly the way people do it. So if you try to create a shear, and the shear is meant to be what? Kashivas, What kind of hashivas do you have if you're creating it from the beginning when they know Torah? If the Rambam would discuss Melekas Hotzah, he would have a good argument to justify a shear of Lachasus Bikur. In one case, where he has the tip, and now he wants to transport it from one place to the other in order to attach it to his fire. But that's not what the Rambam is talking about. The Rambam wants to get a givul, which constitutes a violation of Melekas Mash, and he has that hashivas. And he's telling me, I don't need to go Garrett's. What do you mean you don't need to go Garrett's? Why don't you need to go Garrett's? Is it worth it for your effort to simply create out of this leash of the Gabalus Afar enough to cover people? Who would do such a thing?
The concept that according to the mission is that you see from Rama that you can have different shiurim for different types of the question of losses. Therefore, by lush, you would be Torah less, and they would be Torah for making tip, and therefore you could say there's a small share for
the truth
by
is that
lush.
the truth is that when you're talking about giving a less than a sheep, it's really unique to Melekas Hotzah. Why? In Melekas Hotzah, the Gemara always sets up an object that you're transporting and asking, is there hashivas to that object? Does it function in any way that is worthy for anybody to transport it? That l'chora has nothing to do with creating a givul so that you end up with an object, and that object has hashivas to it. No, boy, that the Mishnah has not even created a makkah or a source for it. But worse than that, if you learn the Gemara, the Sugya on Daf Ches, which apparently, don't take me literally, the Maggid Mishnah skipped that Gemara, but since the Ramach, that Gemara gives us the opposite conclusion. Want to do a Lisha and end up with something cautious. Well, what do you end up with? You do a givul, and you end up with a Grogeris one. And by the way, Rabbi said, where does Grogeris come from? Anybody? I don't know. Correct, Sidur the Pas. All Sidur the Pas, with one exception that we'll study now, is all requires a shear of Grogeris. And that's how the Rambam opens up this discussion about Lisha. But then he says that in the told of Lisha, he's got a new shear, which is less than a Grogeris. But what are you ending up with? You're ending up, after all your efforts and all your tirah, with Kedei L'Chasus Bikur. The Gemara says it's not worth it to end up with that.
The entire process is not worth it for people, just the people. Just
You mean, if you assume that you don't need both kukulos, like the final maskana of the against the final maskana of the It says you need both the 6-9 and givul. And you're saying all you need is givul. Okay, all you need is givul, but so givul is not a mashkin. Yeah, is that what you're saying? Oh, I see. Oh, I see. That's not a bad shot. I'll think about it. I like it. But also, I want to go on to the next point, because this is really the bulk of what I prepared for today. And I learned this sugya many years ago, but I'm telling you every time I look at sugya, it's like starting from scratch. And that's just the way my mind works. The Rambam opened up this discussion about Lash with number 1 and went on to number 2, and now we want to go on to number 3. Number 1 is that the shear of Lash is Kigrogeres. Let's call it the Avmo. You do like that. Then he went on to the Tolda of Megabel, and there the shear was Kedei L'Chasus Bikur. Now let's go to number 3. The Rambam writes that Hanosing Zera Shumshavin or Zera Vishnu v'Chayotze b'Mayim Chayim Mishum Lash. Now again, if I didn't know anything, this would be very strange. You know, you take flaxseed and you soak them in water, and you Chayim Mishum Lash. That doesn't sit well with it. But the Rambam gives an explanation, which is based on the sugya. We'll soon see where that's sugya. Mipnei shein misarvim b'nitlim zevozeh. That somehow, by process of soaking these seeds, what he creates is a deep misarvim zeh. And now the seeds stick to each other. We'll see exactly how that works in just a second. And the Rambam says that that's called Meleches Now, I'm not sure if the Rambam at this point is going back to the ratio, meaning it's a little bit shalom say there, but maybe the Rambam is now going back to the odd, because after all, he's talking about edibles now, so it's doing paragraph like the odd. Or this is a total. Okay, we'll leave that out for the time being. But the main point that we want to make is that the Maggid Mishnah asks the question, where did the Rambam get this from? You're soaking seeds in water, and you're chayav from meleches wash. I mean, that's really what. And the Maggid Mishnah finds a sugya, and this is like the Musa shrugs, how much you have to know in order to know anything. He finds a sugya tucked away in Paradam Chatas, in Zvach. What goes on in Paradam Chatas? What goes on in tangent? If the officials is if some of the dam of touch gets sprinkled on Big Day Kahuna, and how you would clean the Big Day Kahuna. And that's little key. So you soak the garden in water in order to extract it now. Then the Gemara goes on, quoting a sugya, to discuss Meleches Kibbutz on Shabbos. So you have a stain on a cloth, and you soak it in water, and that's called Kibbutz, which is all of Meleches Molavim of Levi. What? Now, having said that, the Gemara goes on to talk about another Molacha, and that is the Molacha of soaking barley, or, well, actually, in the case of Rava, is flax seeds in water. And the Gemara says the following. Does anybody, by the way, have the Gemara spoken here in front? Oh, thank you so much. I don't always have the ability to gather together all the spoiled. And not that there's so many together. But the Gemara says the following. The Gemara says, Zorak Pishto L'mayim Chai. He's soaking flax seeds in water and he's Chai. The Gemara says, I don't get it. If Rava was talking about a cloth and it got stained and then you soak in water, okay, that's what you call Meleches Kibbutz, the total of. But if you're not talking about a Sudar, you're talking about flax seeds. Cleaning his flax seeds, he's chayav from Meleches Kibbutz? Ridiculous. So the Gemara says, Ella, my type of Yishuv Mekadeach. So Rashi explains that Mekadeach means that the flax seeds actually sprout in water. And therefore, if you be chayav, says Rashi, from Meleches Zoreh. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, you're telling me that he's chayav from Meleches Zoreh? Why do you tell me that only flax sprouted from soaking in water? What about Chitin Zoreh? So the Gemara says that there's something unique about flax. That's why he says you're chayav from flax. What's riri? Riri is some sort of a mucus that's inside the flax seeds. And when you soak the flax seeds, this mucus comes out. Rashi says that it's misdavge adod. As a result of soaking the flax seeds, when the mucus exudes, if I can use that word, it causes a kind of a deep. And Rashi says, the Gemara asks, he says that when you talk about orov, they also have this mucus, and therefore if you soak them in water, the riri should generate a feeling of dibur. And the Gemara answers no. Hasam called it lisha. And Rashi says, the rira, if as a result of this beer, you create this dibur, when you soak the zera pishta, Amili told it to lash. It becomes a total lash. I will be shlachim, but we have the oros and the animals, even though there is some element of dibur, but it's not enough. Lo shavet, lo shayach, buka, today, linearly. So you have to figure out exactly what Rashi means, why it's wrong. But says the Maggid Mishnah, we see here clearly that in the case of soaking flaxseed in water, because of this process of removing the mucus, you get a dibur, and the various seeds now connect to each other, creating a new double group, and as a result, you have Mishum Rishon. Fantastic sauce for the Rambam. There's something that when you read it at face value, you don't know what it means. But now we go back to the Rambam is very clear. He says, this so this is the process of creating a dibur for which you have Mishum Mlechas. What do you say? Yeah, I guess Shimshon also has real. No, we have to do a study on Shimshon. Now, I want to present to you two lines in the Arsameh where there's simcha means. And I think, in my humble opinion, he says the following. V'ameshek kosam arama dashore zera shumshim, no zera pishtu b'mayim, chayav mishum. Lo isparesh shi'ura didhu b'divrei rabbeinu. What is the shear in the case of soaking zera pishtu? Is it a grogeres, or is it less than a grogeres? It says, Olam li'el, ba'alocha beis, Ishora chitim sior, shehu shir zorea, chai b'kolshu. V'lomei nechai b'zera pishtu, b'shum zorea, b'is chai b'kolshu. Ad kan lashon ha'arsa. Let's just now try to summarize this. Yosamech asked the following. We turn back to Perek Ches Halacha Beis. The Rambam about Mlechas Zoreh. And the Rambam writes, HaZoreh Kol Shum Chai, the only Malacha of Sidur the Pas, may Yechai for Kol Shum. One single seed has Chashim. You know what a seed can grow? And then the Rambam writes that there are tolos of Zoreh, and Yechai b'kolshu. V'chein hashoreh chitim siorim v'chayotzi b'hen b'mayim. Arezet tol zorea v'chai b'kolshu. In other words, if you have a kernel of wheat or barley and you soak it in water, it will sprout. And if it will sprout, it'll chai zorea. In fact, the Gemara and the Havamina there in Zvachim presented the possibility that soaking flax seeds would also engender a malacha violation of Zorea, but the Gemara had a problem. Why did Rava focus exclusively on Zera Pishta and not mention Pita the Siorim? Basically, the Gemara rejects Zorea only for technical reasons. It doesn't fit into the language of Rava, but the Gemara never argued logically against the Havamina that if you soak flax seeds in water, they sprout and therefore you should be chayav from Mlechas Zoreh. The Gemara had a technical problem. Comes along the Arsamech, he asks the following question. I don't get it. The Rambam is saying that Hanosing Zera Shumshvin or Zera Pishnon of Hayotzim of B'mayim chayav mishum lash. And the Arsamech learned those words in the Rambam, Chai Mishum Lash. At what shear? Anybody? What was bothering the mind of Meir? We're trying to answer to his mind, right? Wait a second, you're a step ahead. But I'm just asking, when you touch up the Rambam, how did he read the words of the Rambam? What did he say? Yes. Grogeres. Meaning that the Arsameh has what I call, one of the Gimel Averis Amuris, one of the Yisodei HaTorah. You Gimel Averis HaTorah, Yisodei HaTorah. And in this case, you'd be chayav for grogeres and not less than a grogeres. Why? Because grogeres is chayav. I'm sorry, because lash is chayav with grogeres. Well, we know this in exception to rule Zoreh. And Zoreh is chayav for kosher. So the Arsaber, without even spelling it out, I'm just, kind of, how should I say, trying to, as a detective, to figure out what underlying premises he's operating with. When he asked the question, chayav for kosher, apparently understood that you're chayav for a grogeres because we're talking about meleches lash. Now I understand the Arsaber's kasha. The Arsaber, why should we chayav only for grogeres? You should be chayav for kosher. Because the Rambam already in Perek says a lot of base established that if you sow chitim and siorim in water, you're chayav because they sprout, and you're chayav from meleches zoreah, which means the Rambam says explicitly, black and white, that you're chayav for kosher. So in other words, the Arsaber doesn't understand by classifying, when the Rambam classifies, saying Zerapishta b'mayim as lash, he is telling us the Rambam. So says the Arsaber. Then you chayav for gogeres and not less than gogeres. So the Arsaber says, I don't understand. You yourself told me, Rabbi Moshe, that you chayav in the case of, don't say, what was the language here? Ashora chitim siorim b'mayim yichayv to meleches zoreah with a kosher. Why shouldn't that apply to Zerapishta? Why does the Rambam take Zerapishta out of all of the days, which is meleches zoreah, where you chayav for a kosher, and classify it in halacha tezayin under meleches lash, which means you're not chayav for less than a grogeres? Okay, so I'll let you say this. You remind me of a story. My father used to tell me that in Rosh Salvation, there was a very brilliant fellow, you heard, Chaim Zimmerman. How many people ever heard of Chaim Zimmerman? So my father says on a few occasions, when Rabbi would say the shir, Rabbi Zimmerman, then he was known as Chaim, would get up and give an answer to Rabbi's kasha. And Rabbi twice, my father said, my father was in the ship for 5 years. He said twice he read Rabbi calls him, and he walked out. He says, that's your answer. That's it. Okay. But let me finish this because I don't get to be able to do well. Anyway, here's what I want to suggest. First of all, it's very simple to know. Again, you should know I'm a tremendous fan of Rabbi Zimmerman. I give a share on his insights into the Chumash once a week. I know that the Rambam holds that you're not chayav b'shum, and that you're not chayav for. Apparently, the Arsaber understood the structure of halacha tezayin in the following way. The Rambam begins with gedulei karka, the av malacha of lash, and he says you're not chayav for less than a grogeres. Then the Rambam goes into the Talmud, which is the case of Gibel Offer, and the Rambam says in that case you're chayav for pikur, which is less than a grogeres. Now we get to the third part of the Rambam, and apparently the Arsaber understood that part 3 of the Rambam goes back to part 1, meaning that now that in the case of Zerapishta we're talking about Gedulei Karka, we're talking about the Avbala. And if we're talking about the Avbala, then the shir has got to be grogeres. And in Rabbe's simplest frame of reference, there's no way that you can talk about Lisha with a shir less than a grogeres. It just can't be. And if the Rambam classified it as a malacha of lash, it means by definition it's got to be a grogeres and nothing left. So therefore, Rabbi Simcha has a valid question. What do you mean? I object. Why should it be chayav for zoreah? What's the difference between Zerapishta and Zerachitim and Zerasiyarim, which Rambam himself was committed to meleches zoreah when he's talking? What do you chayav for a kosher? Now the feeling is tightly when the Rambam gets to the end of halacha tezayin, which is the case of the sinas Zerapishta b'mayim. The Rambam doesn't say that he's chayav mishulash if it's a grogeres. Doesn't say that in the Rambam. Rambam doesn't mention the word grogeres. You'll tell me, well, what do you mean? He doesn't have to mention grogeres because lash is only chayav for what? For grogeres. That's a given. But the answer is that's not a given. Why isn't it a given? Most of you following? Yeah. Why is that not a given? Because the Rambam has just told me that the Gabbalah of his chayav all chassis bikur. So the Rambam already has told me that there's no gzeres hakosim, absolute chok loyam, that you're not chayav for meleches lisha unless you have a grogeres. The Rambam himself recognizes. So why do I know? How do I know that in the third halacha here in Tesai, he's going back to the first halacha, to the ratio against gedulei karka, and he means that you're not chayav for less than grogeres. Maybe the fact that the Rambam wedged in the middle here, in case you don't need a grogeres in chayav for lash, the third case also doesn't need it. But Rabbi Simcha still has an excellent point, and that is that the Rambam did not mention in the case of Mayim in Pishon, in Zer Pishon, that he's chayav for meleches oreah. And here's where Rabbi Simcha has a whole fantastic line show if you're interested. He has a new principle. He says that in soaking Zera Pishon, that's an av malach of lash, whereas the sprouting is only a toll of meleches oreah. So if you have a case where it could fall under one av malach and one toll of a different av malach, then the av malach wins out. You hear this from both sides? It's a fantastical structure here that he creates because he's so bothered by this question. You have an av malach of lash, a toll of zoreah. You're not going to be chayav for the toll of zoreah. You're going to be chayav for the av of lash. The truth is, we do have such a thing, but only in the case where you violated an av and it's toll. Then we can say you're not chayav for the toll. So Rashi is beginning above the ground, and you're only chayav for the av. But when you have an overlap of two different avs, to say that therefore only be chayav for the av and not told a different and by basic, anything else. But again, that's the Yosameh. I just wanted to show you how far you go. So therefore, I want to suggest but they're simply understood that is no fear of zoreah. In this case, in Zera Shushan or Zera Fish on the line. No fear of zoreah for culture. We're going to suggest that's not true. Again, Mechilas told them, who am I to argue? But I'm going to base my case on two words of the Rambam. The Rambam says in Perek as halakha is the Chen Hashorach Chitin Usiorim V'Chayotze Behem. He adds two words Chayotze, and he's telling us that this halacha of zoreah in the case of zera that sprouts in water is not limited to chitin and siorim. There are many other possibilities. One of which is zera pishma, and you would be chayav.
But that's just Merkeza.
What's like what?
That's Merkeza. This is only possible.
No, wait, this is not. Wait, just that. What I just presented now is the deal in the Rambam. Now I want you to hear the longest, and that's the punchline. What I want to suggest is that the Rambam in Halacha Tzayin is talking about an additional chiyuv to Meleches Oreah. And what he's telling you, it all depends on what you're soaking in water. If you're soaking in water one single zera of pishtan, then you be chayav for what? For Meleches Oreah, and Zoreah is chayav in a kol shu. When it comes to dibur, which means lash, because of the rear, then you need a certain amount. Again, what is that amount? That is amount will be the amount that you'll end up with what? With a gogeres. And now you're chayav for Meleches lash. It doesn't matter that with one seed you're chayav for Meleches Oreah. That's true. And at that point, when he got the Asra, if you all get the Asra, the Totem Shema, so he got Asra for Meleches Oreh, and he's tired for Meleches Oreh. But what happens? Asks the Rambam if he takes a whole cluster of Zera Pish, such that now the rear could create a deal, and at the end of the day, he takes through the act of this gibel, he creates a domer mutzah, creating a solid, and that solid has the size of a gorgaskus. Now he has multiples. And he's chayav for Meleches Lach. Not the way the Arsaneach understood that he wouldn't be chayav for Zoreh. The Rambam doesn't have to address the case of Zoreh. He's already told us. He gave us 2 examples. He said chayotze. Go check it out, says the Rambam, and find me any kind of zod, any kind of zera, that when you soak it in water, it sprouts. And if it sprouts, you're chayav for Meleches Oreh. How much of a zera did you put in? A kol shu. And that's the yuchadus of Meleches Oreh. Now, says the Rambam, you should know that in zera kishon, in addition to Meleches Oreh, you might be chayav for another malachim. Namely what? Meleches Lach. But again, here, I'm going to accept the Arsaneach's premise that you're only chayav for Lach with the shear of grogeres. Therefore, you would need to do a dibur of zera kishon such that when you end up with of a solid substance, it's a grogeres source, and therefore you chayav. Should Meleches. So whereas the Arsaneach understood that the Rambam by classifying the Sinas Mayim and Krishna on the Lach is excluding Zoreh, we're suggesting an alternative. Right then? All right, take this opportunity to spend on a good bed jar and those of us will leave tomorrow. So we might not see you.